Jesus was willing to come in contact with the unclean to restore them to a wholeness, to a wellness. Hi, how you doing? I am Ellie Johnson, and this is Isaiah Movement. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. The purpose of this channel is to make the invisible visible and the spiritual understandable. Now, there are so many Christians out there right now, and non-Christians, but there's so many people out there right now who actually believe that they're too dirty and unclean to have a relationship with God, because they feel like the things they've been through has made them so dirty, so unworthy, so unclean to be in a relationship with God. They allow that to push them away from God, or to pull them away from God, or to stop them from reaching out to having a relationship with God. They say, I'm too dirty to deal with God. I'm too dirty for God to even want anything to do with me. I'm too unclean or too abused or used for God to even want anything to do with me. Why would God want anything to do with me? I believe God still wants to deal with everybody. And so let's build the case. Let's see, let me show you why God still wants to deal with, or show you how God deals with people who are unclean. Let's start by reading a couple of Bible verses. Leviticus 5:3. Or if he touches human uncleanness, whatever uncleanness with which a man may be defiled, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty. So this verse is pretty much talking about anyone who touches anything that's unclean. If you don't really realize it, then he's innocent. But if you realize he touched something that's unclean, he's unclean and he is guilty of being unclean. And usually when a person is unclean, they have to be thrown out of the camp. They cannot be in the camp. They're exiled from being around other people. Now let's read Leviticus 13:45. As for the leopard who has the infection, his clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall be uncovered. And he shall cover his mustache and call out, unclean, unclean. Leviticus 15:25. Now if a woman has a discharge of her blood for many days, not at the period of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond that period, for all the days of her impure discharge, she shall continue as though in the menstrual impurity she is unclean. Just wanted to give those verses as an example of things that was considered unclean, and to show that anything that touches those things that are unclean would become unclean as well. Now again, we have people out here who feel like they are dirty. We have people out here who are feeling like they are unclean, unworthy of being in a relationship with God. This just isn't true. God came for the unclean. Christ came for the unclean, for the dirty, for the unwanted. That is why Christ came. While Jesus was walking this earth, he showed that he was willing to come in contact with the unclean and make it look like that he was unclean, just to make the person who was unclean whole again. Because remember, anybody that touches anything that's unclean is unclean. So Jesus was willing to put himself in position to make himself look unclean in order to make the unclean whole again. In Matthew 8:3, the Bible gives an example of how Jesus went and he reached out his hand to touch a man that had leprosy. He touched him and he healed him. But he reached out his hand and touched him. By Jesus reaching out his hand and touching him, he technically should have been considered unclean. clean. Jesus knew the law. He understood what he was doing there. He understood by reaching out in front of the Pharisees who happened to be there, but he understood by reaching out and touching this unclean man, everybody around was going to be like, you are unclean. You are now unclean. Jesus, at that moment, was ready to make himself look unclean, to make that man who was unclean whole. And if we go to Mark 5, what happened was there was a time when Jesus was walking and there was a lady who touched his garment and she had the issue of bleeding, where she was constantly bleeding. I believe it was for like 12 years. She was bleeding straight. She tried to get it fixed, but she couldn't get it fixed. So she went and touched Jesus' garment. And what happened was she got healed. So Jesus stopped and said, who touched me? He made a scene. He said, who touched me? Who touched me? Who touched me? Until she came forward and she confessed and told Jesus everything. She told Jesus about her issue with bleeding and everything like that. At that moment, everyone around should have been like, well, Jesus, you're unclean now. Because by tradition, Jesus was unclean. A woman with the issue of bleeding has just now touched him. Now Jesus would be unclean by the standards of the old law. But yet Jesus said, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Jesus was willing to come in contact with the unclean to restore them to a wholeness, to a wellness. It goes even deeper. And 1 Peter talks about how the weight of our sin was put on Jesus, and he held that sin as he was on the cross. Now Jesus held our sin and he became sin, meaning he became unclean for us. Jesus took that appearance of being unclean to open that door to a relationship with the Father, for us to have a relationship with the Father once again. He took on an appearance of being unclean so that we might become clean and have a relationship with the Father. If you are worried, if you're one of those people who are worried about being unclean and having a relationship with God, you miss the whole gospel. The gospel is that Jesus came for the unclean, the broken, the unworthy, so that they might be able to have a relationship once again with the Father, and that they might become clean by him taking on their unclean. While he was on the cross, of course. While he was on the cross, he took on their impurities and put it on himself so that they could become pure and have a one-on-one relationship with the Father. So if you are one of the people who are dealing with this unclean feeling, this unworthy feeling, and you feel dirty and you feel like that is keeping you from having a relationship with God, the only reason that's keeping you from having a relationship with God is because it's in your own mind, it's in your own heart. You miss the message. The message is, if you accept Christ, you are not dirty. You are not unclean. You are not unworthy. You are worthy. You are clean. And you are pure enough to have a relationship with the Father because of Christ. So no more thinking I'm dirty, unworthy, unclean. I can't have a relationship with God. Now it's time to think, because of Christ, I know what I've done. But because of Christ, I know where I've been. But because of Christ, I am worthy enough to have a relationship with the Father. And that's today's video. I want to thank you for watching this video. Please like, share, subscribe. Remember, you are worthy because of Christ.